Hey everyone, this is Brady, the Game Dev Artisan. In this video of Godot Fundamentals, we'll be covering how you can remap our input actions to different keys to allow our users to fully customize on how they play our game. We'll be creating a custom button that we can then select in our menu to listen for our input events and remap those actions to the keys we press. And if you want to follow along, you can view our source code on our GitHub project. You can also check out our website at gamedevartisan.com. For every video topic, we try and cover a blog post that covers every step that you would want to follow along with in written form. Links for this post are in the description down below. To get started, we'll be creating a custom Remap button class that will extend the default behavior of our menu's button. We'll be creating a file within our Scenes UI folder inside our menu of type script that inherits from our button class. We'll go ahead and call this script remap_button.gd. Our custom remap button will be taking advantage of the toggle mode of our button, which will track the press state of our button and altering our input handling to listen for our input events for only once the button has been pressed. We'll be updating the button's text to display that we're listening for input, and once we receive the input, we'll update our InputMap's action and release the button's press state. To get started, we'll give our class name a remap button, and we'll create an export variable called action, and this will be of type string. This will represent the action within our input map that this button will be remapping for. Then once we initialize our button, we'll be setting the toggle mode equal to true, so we can take advantage of that toggle state. And inside this initialization, we'll also be adding a type variation to our theme that we're going to call remap button. We'll cover that later. Next, in our ready function, we're going to be setting the processing for our unhandled input equal to false. This will disable our unhandled input function from processing on each frame. Next, we're going to call a custom function called updateKeyText. We'll go ahead and just create that real quick. This function is responsible for taking our button's text and setting it equal to a template string that we're going to map to our input map, where we get the actions events, and we're going to pass in the action from our exported variable. We'll get the first element inside those events. We'll get that as a text value. Next, we're going to create a function for our toggled state that when our button is pressed, we want to first set our process behavior for our unhandled input, and we're going to toggle this based on whether or not our toggle state is pressed. And in the event that our button is pressed, we're going to take our text and set it to a temporary string of something like awaiting input. Next, we're going to release the focus of our UI element. And in the event that the button isn't pressed, we want to just update our key text and re-grab the focus for this element. Now lastly, let's add the logic for our input handling. And here we're using the unhandled input. And here we're checking if our event is a pressed event. And we're going to take our input map. We're going to get the action and erase all events related to that action. And next, we're going to take our input map. We're going to add an event to that action. In this case, it's going to be the key that we just pressed. Once we do that, we're going to unset our pressed state of our button. And to quickly recap, our toggle state is in charge of determining whether or not we want to process this unhandled event function. This will run in every frame once our button is toggled down. So if our button is pressed, we're waiting for input, and this unhandled input event, it will be running in every frame of our process. Then, once we press a button, we'll update our input map according to the button we pressed, and we'll release our button press, which will then call the toggle state and run this else condition and toggle our process function to no longer run. Now, rather than adding each remap button to our menu manually, we're going to create a variable array of our action items. And when our game menu is ready, we'll be creating a list from our action remap items and adding them to the UI. So to do this, we'll open up our game menu We're going to add a new export variable called action items. And this will be of type array. And inside that array is going to be an element of strings. Now we'll be adding our elements to our existing grid container. So let's go ahead and rename our grid container to our settings grid container. We're gonna go ahead and give this a unique name. And we're also going to take our main menu and give it a unique name as well. And for both of these elements, we're going to add a reference in our onReady to bind those references inside our code. And next, we'll be creating a new function we're going to call create action remap items. And here, we'll start by getting a previous item from our settings grid container by getting a child from the end of our list. To do this, we'll take our settings grid container, we'll get the number of children from our child count, and we'll subtract 1 to get the last element within that array. Now we're going to loop over the index in the range of our action items size. This will give us an index position of each element in our array. And here we're going to extract away our action as a string of our action items based off their index. Next, we'll be creating a label that is for that action item. We'll set the label's text to the action string. And inside our settings grid container, we're going to add that child label. Next, we'll be creating our button from our remap button class that we've created. We'll be setting the button's action variable equal to that action string. Next, we're going to take our button and we're going to set that its focus neighbor on the top is that previous item that we've set. Here we'll call the get path to ensure that we're using the proper node path within the node tree. And for that previous item, we're going to take the focus neighbor bottom element and we're going to set it as a reference to this button that we just created using the get path method as well. Next, we're going to check if our current index position within our elements is the last element in the array by calling actions items size -1. And if it is, this means this is the last element within our list, in which case we want to reference the main menu that comes next. So we'll say our main menu button, the focus neighbor top is going to be equal to this button. And for our button, the focus neighbor on the bottom is our main menu. We can call the get path on that. Last, we want to set that our previous item is now going to become our button that we just created to set it up for the next iteration of our array. And then we will take this button and add it to our settings grid container as a child. Lastly, we're going to take our function and we're going to call it within our ready function. That way, once our settings grid container is ready, it will call the create actions remap items, which will then generate a label and a button for each action item that we want to remap our buttons for. So in order for that to work, we must select our game menu, and inside our action items array, we can start adding elements for each action that we want to be able to remap for. So we can add our move_forward, our move_backward, our turn left, and our turn right. And lastly, we'll do our weapon fire. Great. Last, to cover the remap button theme type variation, we will open up our assets folder inside our theme, open up our default theme, and we'll go to our manage items, and we're going to be adding a new custom type of remap button. Once we've added that remap button, we can go ahead and close, click our dropdown, select our remap button, select the option on the last tab. For our base type, we'll be setting it to set type of button, which means now when we look at our settings that we're overriding for, it inherits all of the behavior of our default button class. For our purposes, we'll be creating a new style box that will give us a new background behind our button that we are assigning this to. So we can start with our disabled button. We'll go ahead and click this. We're going to use the style box flat. And here we'll go ahead and, in the inspector, give it a new background color. I'm going to give it a little bit of blue, darken it up a little bit, and give it some transparency. Let's call it 220. Next, inside my margins, I'm going to give it about 2 pixels of margin. I'm going to save that, open up our theme again. Now we're going to add this to every one of our button types. Here we'll go ahead and copy and paste each one of our button modes. Now, if we save that and run our game, so we fire it up, open up our game menu, we can see that we now have new elements for each action item and the corresponding buttons with their backgrounds being displayed as part of that new style box. If we select one of these buttons, we'll notice that it by default has the key as well as the physical label. More on this in a moment. If we select one, we see it says awaiting input. If I press W, if I press this next one and press down on the keyboard, you can see that we're able to update all of our keys. If I come back, test, all my keys seem to be working. Now, why did we have the physical inside the button? Well, if we return to our editor, go to our project settings, inside our input map, we'll notice that the action that has been mapped for this particular event has the label of physical. If we select our edit event and we look under this dropdown for additional options, it's using the physical key code. There are other options such as the key code or key label using Unicode. These options don't include the physical text inside when we look at our mapping. So if we return to our game and open up our menu, we can see for our Unicode, it shows Unicode. But if we use the other option for the key code, it just has the letter A. So the key code equivalent is actually what is being used inside our function within our Remap button when we are mapping our event directly from our input event. So when we remap our key, the text that we're pulling doesn't include Unicode or physical in the actual text response. So just keep that in mind. You could always create a lookup dictionary or something similar to be able to map the verbiage that you want for the keys that are being pressed. But that's fairly involved and outside the scope of this video. But there you go. This is just the beginning of remapping for our input action events. You could introduce keyboard, mouse, and controller-specific mappings. You could limit the types of buttons that you can press, enable multiple tracks of events per action, and set up profiles of popular mappings for the game. This should be enough to get you introduced to the concept, but as always, you could learn more about the input maps from Godot's official documentation page. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, and let us know in the comments down below. And if you aren't already, please do subscribe, and click the bell to be notified of new videos. And if you have any questions or ideas, be sure to jump into our growing Discord community and start chatting. And as always, links to everything are in the video description down below. Thanks for watching, and happy coding.